How's it going?
Really good, really good. Are we live? Are we am I catching?
Yeah, I mean, this is we're live. I mean, I don't know what that necessarily means, but I mean, other than like I'm just using Twitter Spaces for now, because if people want to jump in, they can, but it also allows me to like prevent perfectionism. Like if we did this like as a proper podcast, I would spend like days editing and never send anything out. So I was like, well, let me just record on here live, and then I'll have something for people to listen to. And if I want to edit it later, I can.
That's wise.
Yeah, at least for me. But yeah, so how's it going? Since I think last time you and I spoke was like 2020.
Yeah.
And yeah, how's I guess assuming everything's fine, you made it through COVID. Your studio's still there.
Yeah, we're intact. It was a wild ride for sure. You know, what month was it you and I spoke?
Honestly, I don't know. Might have been like, I don't know. It could have even been like, let's see. I'm looking back at some text. It might have been like September.
Okay. Yeah, so we were starting to see the daylight at that point. You know, it was like March, April into May was pretty grim.
Yeah.
Just trying to keep the whole thing afloat. You know, I'm sure so many people went through similar stuff, but yeah, no, it was. God was good. I mean, we came out intact. The studio's still going. San Diego, we kept the same space. In New York, we moved to Brooklyn, Williamsburg. So that was smart, anyways.
Yeah. Well, that's good
Yeah.
to hear. Yeah. So, well, I guess just for context for people who are going to listen to this or whatever is, I originally had reached out to you in 2020, I guess in September, right around that time, or I guess earlier that year. I've been talking with Luke Jenner of the Rapture, and then another friend, Ombeline, who does these like 36-hour events in Paris where they would do like, just bands would play like, traditional hymns and songs or whatever. Anyway, we were talking pretty regularly for some reason during that time. And we felt like, even though I'm sure this is not true, that we were like the only people who were into weird music that were also into Jesus. And so we would just chat and then share like music racks. And Luke actually recommended I check out you. I was familiar with Soul Drunk, but I never had really listened to it. And same with Trumans Waters. And so then, so you were on my radar. And then I was like, I started to feel like there was something happening in music, but I couldn't really tell what was going on. I was like, I think there's something. I just kind of this like gut feeling about like changes in Christian or music in general with a reflection on God. And so I had reached out to you, and you connected me with like Daniel Smith or Danielson. And I just was just getting in touch with people about like, what are they, what are people feeling? Is there anything interesting happening? What projects are they working on? And so that's how we got connected. So that was like a really long roundabout way to explain that. But, and then you and I chatted. I actually had that conversation was actually really good for me. Even though I didn't really figure anything out from those calls. Like,
Yeah.
it was like cool. And then now, and earlier this year, I wrote an essay about, all of a sudden I just noticed, oh wow, there's a lot of artists and musicians talking about God all of a sudden. And so I wrote an essay about it. It got kind of picked up just within like fringe Twitter circles. And then I hosted it. Actually, the first God Filled talk I hosted with a friend of mine, and we had like 400 people show up, and we just talked about God and like why people were into God all of a sudden. And I was like, well, maybe this should be like serve as some sort of a template to like hopefully be a discussion point where who people who are exploring this can see what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that was kind of some of the preface for this. And so, you know, I guess I'm kind of curious, just since we last spoke, is there anything interesting that's been happening musically or spiritually in general?
Yeah, I mean, it's like obviously when something like that, hits the planet, it it just throws things into a whole new context, you know. So much of what, you know, obviously, like, it just interrupted everything, and it interrupted, you know, live music just shut down. I can't. Yeah, so many bands just stopped at that point, and it's like you're starting to see, like, well, who's picking up, who's moving forward, you know. um and it's interesting. I mean, I love times of deep change, you know. So it was not a fun 2 years by any stretch, you know. I lost some really good friends. Eli, who was the drummer for the three albums that the first three Trumans Water albums, and um, pretty much most of what most, if not all of what Octagrape recorded. He passed last August, you know, along with some others. So it's just an incredibly, like, personally tough 2 years. Um, but then you start to say, like, well, what is like, what's coming out of it, you know, what's the expression that's coming out of it? And you know, it's very humbling, I guess, as would say, as an artist. It's one of those things where, you know, you can't just be like, well, we did the last album, let's do the next album. You know, there's just this time of, you know, what am I doing? What, you know, you can't, there's no muscle memory. You know, I can't imagine artists just being, you know, control C, control V at this point. There has to be some sort of, like, you know, what do I have, and then how do I want to bring it? And that seems like the moment to me. I'm just kind of absorbing. You know, I'm doing a lot of, like listening and absorbing. I don't think I have a lot of concrete, like, this is what's happening. But it's one, I you know, it's one of those moments in art and music and film and everything where I think we're going to look back, you know, 25 years from now and be like, whoa, a lot changed during those 2 3 years.
Yeah. What are you, so right now, what are you working on now? I mean, I think last time we spoke, you said you were still doing some soul junk stuff. You did something with Parallel Stereo. What are
Mhm.
you working on right now? Are those same projects or anything new, or?
Yeah, and, you know, it's just like, it's, put it this way, it was just bizarre how much work it took to save our studio and our business. And and you know, it's one of those things where it's like, I look back and I think, over the past 2 years, I haven't released any new music, you know. And I don't know if I could say that since the early 90s. You know, I was recording at least an album a year, you know, recording sometimes several albums a year. And so yeah, it's that part is tough, you know, to just look down and be like, yeah, what, you know, a lot of people were able to use the time and the, you know, the fact that the world shut down to just be like, I'm going to focus on music more. And it had kind of the reverse effect on me, you know. I never stopped writing. I never, you know, I'm still pulling people together and recording. But yeah, it's one of those strange things where, you know, I have a 15 song Parallel Stereo record that's 70% mixed. And, you know, it's like the next, it's just really tough to know how to bring it to completion, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of where, you know, in terms of expression, it's like, I haven't had to deal with this thing for since the early 90s, where it's just like there's just so much happening that, you know, it's like the thing that is most important to me in terms of my, like, expression is right there, and I can't just be like, let's finish it, you know.
Yeah. And I guess also for context for maybe people who aren't familiar with your work too. So you did you started with Truman's Water, and then you did Soul Junk, and then you that's been an ongoing project, and then And I guess Trumans Waters was, I guess, like a spazzy kind of 90s rock outfit, right? And then Soul Junk was noisy, lo-fi, and then it progressively became more experimental hip hop stuff. And then Parallel Stereo was more of like a tradition, more like not traditional, but more like a contemporary worship project. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and then there was Octagrape as the other kind of trap in that sequence. That was like from 2012 to 2016, 2017, and then there was a follow-on band to that, Sumatraban, that was the drummer from Octagrape and me. So yeah, that kind of that sums up most of what I've done. Yeah, and it's interesting in that Trumans Water, I was the only person in the band who was a believer. Soul Junk, everyone was, but we were playing music we were playing music in weird context, places where we'd finish our sets and people come up and be like, man, that's this elaborate joke, singing about God. And like the assumption that like you wouldn't do this sincerely now, would you? And it was like, actually, wow, yeah, no, we're really into this, um
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, that's what's so interesting to me. I felt like it was kind of like a flippant remark, but I was talking to somebody recently about how it felt um, like Gen X, and this is very just broad statements here. It felt like that was like the least cool time to be a Christian, like during that kind of like peak cultural moment. And then for like millennials, it was like, well, now that like Sufjan's out there, we can kind of at least, same thing with probably the people responding to you, is like, well, we'll kind of like hide behind this like irony, like we like it because of we'll hide behind irony. And then I feel like right now what's happening is people are a little bit more they're like past this kind of, they're like post irony, where they're like more like probably making things in the way that you were with Soul Junk or are, where it's not ironic, it's just that like it's not this binary situation where like you either make worship music like Hillsong or you make you know uh different alternative music or whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't imagine besides you there were very many people playing that stuff like that in the 90s, at least that I can find. I mean, there was a noise group called it's just one guy, but Clang Quartet, but that was noise, so there's also a very different context. I mean, like pure noise, not like noisy like what you're doing. Was there anyone else that was like around that time that was doing stuff similar, or at least had the similar kind of like approach that you were taking?
Yeah, there was, it was like we kind of ended up finding each other. It wasn't, it's kind of like this thing of when an artist or a band or something like makes something, the majority of listeners are like, they receive it and they're like, where does this go? Like, where does this fit? How do I contextualize this? And you're right. It's like in the early 90s, mid 90s, there was very little grid. It was just like there was starting to be certain iconic things that people like. We Soul Junk started recording our first albums, and we just got in the funniest situations. We I can just remember, like I just explained, like I just gave the story of like playing at clubs where people were just like, just outspoken atheist. It was just very like very punk nihilist, like no desire for God to be in the conversation. And so there would be those contexts. And then we would also, since everybody in the band was like deep believers, we would also, people would say like, oh, you're Christians in a band, well, you should come play this thing at our church. And so we would show up there and it would just be hilarious. There would just be no shared musical reference points, and we get up sincerely sing our songs, and people would just, you just see the room empty out. So yeah, that was really funny. And then slowly but surely we would start to I remember getting a phone call from Portland, and somebody had like picked up one of our 7-inches in a little record store up there, and like tracked down our names off the back of the 7-inch and just said, "Hey, like we have this little house church, and our friends put on Tom Fest up here, and wow, we would love to get you guys up here." And at around the same time, then my booking agent, who I knew through Trumans Water, and was also just like, she was not a believer, but she had this fascination with what I was doing with Soul Junk, and was talking with us about booking. She was like, "You have to meet Danielson family. You have to meet Daniel Smith from Danielson family. You guys are just like long lost brothers." And so that all started happening around the same period of time. I would say that was probably more like probably like 96. um and then we kind of all started finding each other, and it was a wonderful moment, because it was all these people who had like not created a thing to fit in a box. Like there was no defined, make this thing and these people will like it. That didn't exist. It was just like people who were kind of like, a voice crying out in the wilderness, just go, this is in you. You can't hold it back. Just go. And then we all kind of found each other. And, the Psalters, I remember that band was just like, just nice and bizarre. And we slowly started, you know, ending up the same places. We get invited to Tom Fest up in Port north of Portland, kind of border between Oregon and Washington. And then Cornerstone, we started getting invited there, and we started realizing like, oh, there actually are these festivals, and there actually are these groups, and some of it made sense. It was like, oh yeah, so these sort of bands do amazingly well here. Like at that time, like MXPX was dominating, anywhere. POD was massive, and you start realizing there's these iconic elements even to this scene. But there were still just plenty of, and I mean, great bands, both of those. But there
Yeah,
were
those
still,
are probably a little different than your scene, but
yeah, but it was still fun, because there were just like there were just, you know a lot of outliers, a lot of people who just, didn't really fit in where they came from, but then they would kind of find this commonality in the in this weird place of like, we have this very distinct expression, and we love Jesus with all our hearts, and and nobody really gets it. Like nobody gets it, but like you get it because you're doing the same thing. Way.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I got saved in like 2004, and but prior to that was like pretty involved in like the experimental noise scene, and then before that was like more the indie scene. Um, and then yeah, it was just impossible to find people who had overlying interests of experimentalism and like Christianity. And so that was, yeah, you just started searching. And eventually, yeah, over time I started finding more and more people, but it was a very slow grind. And I'm like, well, why? That's why hopefully this will help sort of connecting more dots for people. But the you mentioned Tom Fest. What is that? I'm familiar with Cornerstone, but like as a church going guy, like Cornerstone came up as a youth, but like Tom Fest might have been before me.
Yeah, Tom Fest. It was the same bands that play Cornerstone would, for the most part, play Tom Fest as well. It was a little shorter of a. I get the feeling that it was going really strong throughout the 90s and maybe early 2000s, and then just kind of like, faded off.
Yeah.
um but yeah, we would do both of those. I would say late 90s. We would go with Danielson family, and I think Sufjan was still doing those festivals back then, and we would play both of those festivals, and they had a very similar feel. it was kind of like, about Cornerstone. Tom Fest was at a I think it was called Stevenson. Shoot, what was the name of the campgrounds? But it was right on that river. I should know my geography better. It should be, I think it's like Columbia River, right in between Washington and Oregon. And so it would be just on the Washington side. And so it'd be this, vast, like open space with like, massive forests around it. And you know, you could just, you could play music loud from many different stages and late into the night, and like no one cared. So
but Cornerstone was more like I guess at least my remembrance of it. I never went, but like it was some sort of like weird version of like Warped Tour or something. But like you would also have, maybe you'd have like MXPX there, but then you'd have like Pedro the Lion or something perform, right?
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or Hammer would, when you're in Hammer, I'm not, um,
Gotcha. Okay.
it was a funny thing. Like, we found out MC Hammer was playing. We're like, this is incredible, and then we're like, oh shoot, we're playing the same time MC Hammer's playing. Like Danielson Family and Soul Junk are playing right at the same time. So, okay, most of the festival was going to be over watching him. Well, I guess he had only brought a DAT machine, and it would stop. He played Can't Touch This, and then it like, his DAT machine hung up, and so he couldn't get to the second song or the third song, fourth song. So he ended up playing Can't Touch This 3 times. Finally, the crowd is like, all right, and walked over to see us play. So I was like, there's a massive influx of people.
You got like the leftovers of like Can't Touch This like on the third time.
Yeah. They're just, I guess we've seen your set. Let's go check out Danielson Family and Soul Junk. So.
Crazy. So what were you like, as far as like music that you were listening to at that time too? What were some of like the precursors or like influences, I guess, and they could be religious or spiritual or whatever or not, but I'm kind of curious, were there other like weirdo kind of everyone seems to have like the same kind of influences, like the Trees or whatever from the 70s, and like the 80s was like kind of a weird time for Christians and music. What were you listening to, or what's like kind of the same vein of the kind of like thing you're flowing in? Like, was there any kind of precursors?
Yeah, I'm kind of a weird that, like, some of the most defining moments of my musical kind of exploration have been where I sort of crystallized into this certain style of music that I'm interested in, and I just explore everything I can possibly. Somebody throws out a new band I don't know of, I have to go chase them down and figure out who it is. And I remember, it first happened when I was in high school. This would be back in the 80s, and I was like, I lived inland, and so I was like a little like hard rock metal kid. Like, I'd sit in my room and just like shred, play like, you just like, back then it would be like Ozzy or Van Halen. Like, I'm 14, 15, just like learning all these solos. And then I went over to my parents put me in a high school on the coast. It was like half an hour drive, and all of a sudden, like, nobody at this new high school, like, there was just like you Neanderthals, like none of us listen to metal, none of us listen to like Zeppelin, like, forget, like, we're into The Cure, we're into like punk, we're into, and it was so disorienting because I was so into what I was into. But then I ended up loving knowing nothing about music again. And so it was this crazy, like, oh yeah, I'm completely ignorant about punk and goth and all this stuff, and just art rock and new wave. And I just remember, like, well, then now I have a bunch of new bands I can get completely into and buy everything they ever put out. And then I went off to college, and it was just like, I was still getting my head around that. And then I just remember discovering the Velvet Underground. I think I'd been listening to a bunch of REM, and they covered the Velvet Underground. I remember the Velvet Underground just being this crazy gateway into noise and into really experimental culture. Probably everything up till then I was listening to could still be played on the radio. And once I found the Velvet Underground and Sonic Youth, and this was the late 80s, all of a sudden it was just like, oh, this is like truly experimental weirdo culture, like, and just kind of following out all the references people would throw out. Thurston Moore from Sonic Youth was amazing at just like every interview he would give in the late 80s and early 90s. He'd name drop like 15 bands that I didn't know about, and it just drove me nuts. I'm like, I thought I knew every band that existed, and I would have to go follow these all out. And of course there would be like records you could never find in a million years, and if you did, they cost $300. And it was wonderful. It was, again, just this, um, this ability to like know nothing about a style of music I was fascinated with. And then I think it probably happened again in the, of course, coming out of that whole thing into the early 90s was Trumans Water. And then Trumans Water kind of took everything I had ingested up until that point and kind of crystallized it into the shape that I became known for. It was indie rock, and it was noisy guitar focused indie rock. And, all of a sudden, we were playing with bands that we loved, and, my musical shape became very defined. And then when I got off the road and I got married, and we had my first, we had Jude. He was born in 95. I got thrown out of orbit again. I wasn't always on the road, listening to similar bands as we were playing with. And so then I just started like hearing weird electronic stuff. I would hear drum and bass, and I'd be like, what planet is this from? Or I would hear people, early AFX Twin or Plastic Man, and it started kind of connecting the dots between the noise artists I had been like, the Merzbow type stuff that I was like listening to back in the indie rock and noise rock stuff. So yeah, and then Soul Junk, we started just getting way into like drum and bass and hip hop. That was, I didn't for the during the 90s, I didn't for the most part like commercial hip hop. I had followed hip hop through the late 80s with, like, I was way into Public Enemy and De La Soul and more of the arty stuff, more of the, but then into the 90s, it just like this fully, like, I felt like in the late 80s, early 90s, hip hop needed to be huge to be legit. And then in the early 90s and forward, it was just like underground hip hop became this insane, wonderful place to explore. So, longest possible answer to a simple question, but looking back on the whole thing, I just like, I am like, every my most the best experiences for me musical, it would be to find myself in this environment where I would just be like, I don't have a clue as to what's going on, but I love it.
So what are you listening to now then?
So it's the craziest question, but I think I talked to you last 2 years ago about having that experience where I was listening to a worship song to learn it to play in church.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something about like you felt like God was teaching you how to like was teaching you about worship or something.
Yeah. It was a little like I agreed to play guitar with my church, and I was learning the worship set, and I was just listening to songs. The MD told us, like, just listen to the songs like 10 times before you try and learn them. That's the best way. Just get the song, like, just so it flows before you try and sit down and learn the parts. It's like, okay, that makes sense. So I would try to do that, like they'd give us 4 or 5 songs, and I try and listen throughout the week 10 times to each song if I could. And yeah, I remember like listening to that Mark McMillan song, How He Loves, and I think it was the Jesus Culture version of it. And I didn't even mean to listen to it. It wasn't on our set list, but it was one of those things where YouTube just spun it forward and started playing it. And I went to go and turn it off or spin it back to the song that I was supposed to be learning. And it was like, as I went to do it, I really felt the Holy Spirit just be like, no, let this play. And so I let it play. And, yeah, I was like, I kind of had this like, yeah, I know this song. I've heard this song, it's a cool song. Yeah, you're the Father's love. I love it. It's great. But I wasn't really engaging. And then about halfway through, without any warning, I had this feeling of like, I have to get out of the living room where everyone is, because I'm about to come unglued. And I just ran in the bathroom and just like fell on the floor and just kind of came apart for about 10 minutes. And this was I would say 2016. And I remember just kind of like being like, God, I don't need to be the musical know-it-all anymore, because what just happened was so like, I have no explanation for what just happened. And I mean, this is a 4-chord song, and this is the kind of worship music that I would have before said was just like, I would describe it as mainstream, and I don't know what just happened to me. And so, it's nuts. Since that point, I mean, it's been 6 years now, and I've recorded the first parallel stereo record. I've recorded the second one, and I go through these, things where I find I find songs where I feel the presence of God really strong. And they can be songs that like nobody knows, or they can be songs that like, like you mentioned, like a massive Hillsong hit that is just like, if I were to say the name, it would be like, you're into that. It's just like, but I, I I experienced the presence of God listening to that song or playing that song. And so then I'll go and I'll listen to just the types of music that I've always been into, just which is way more experimental, way more like amorphous, way more, and it's just the strangest dynamic in the last 6 years of I'm no longer like I I need a library with every single book that exists in it. It's just like, I guess I put everything in view of like, okay, I'm a worshiper in spirit and truth, and that's really all I need to be. And I pictured David. Here, one sec.
Are you expecting somebody?
Probably a kombucha person.
Long hair, kind of like
Yeah.
my beard.
Yeah, let him in. I pictured David singing his songs going up the hill in Jerusalem, and it just seems like it would be like the least safe musical environment ever. And so I have hope. I'm like worship in spirit and truth can just be this just ridiculous, like incredibly expressive environment. But it's really my entire focus at this point. When I hear elements in just any piece of music or any piece of noise or any piece of, I'm always like, okay, what does that mean? How can I worship with that?
So what do you like? What and I totally resonate with that too. I mean, the music I usually worship to is stuff that I would never listen to for like any other purpose. It's like purely like almost like utilitarian for me. I mean, that doesn't sound right because it's not, obviously it's an emotional experience, but like there's definitely yeah, songs I would never listen to on my own, or the songs that I use to fully worship. What are the like what are you like what music have you listened to that kind of brings on that spiritual experience? Is there anything like your go-tos?
Yeah, I mean, just yesterday, I think I was listening to a message, and YouTube just is like, oh, you'll want to hear this, and the Helsers did this recently recorded this prayer for Ukraine, and I'd never heard it. I don't know when it came out. It's probably within the last week or two, and I was just like driving to get gas, and just deeply moved. And they, it's like I saw Helser's prayer for Ukraine. I'm like, well, what is that going to be? Are they going to just be like crying out to God for Ukraine? And it was just like, my gosh, the first 5 minutes of it was just this very distinct, haunting, beautiful melody, and all they were singing was hallelujah.
Really? So that's interesting to me. You mentioned that because like, for some reason, music that's super okay. There's been. I want to see if you've been catching this too. It seems like some of the more popular worship music now has been like stuff coming out from like groups like Upperroom or whatever, where they just like repeat the same stuff over and over again, and it actually really moves me. And so like, well, they'll sing like hollow, I don't know, they'll sing like "You're Worthy" or whatever over and over and over again, and I just get like annihilated.
Yeah.
The you mentioned the Ukraine thing reminded me of there's actually this guy recorded during the Hong Kong protests in 2019. There was a point at which like 2 million people were on the streets singing "Sing Hallelujah to the Lord," and they just repeated that over and over again.
Yeah.
And just listening to that with like 2 million people singing just that was like, I mean, I downloaded the video from YouTube, and I just like put it on loop, like while I'd be outside or something, and just listen to it for like hours. There was something that was really, I don't know. It just seems like to me, like right now, there's a lot of things where people are, it's just very, very simple. And yet it somehow like strikes the right chord with like, I don't know. I don't even know how to explain that relationship between like us and God, but I'm just singing the same lyrics over and over again. I'm like stuck.
Have you ever heard Gavin Bryars' Jesus Blood Never Failed Me Yet?
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I mean, that's an amazing example of that.
Did you read? Are you familiar with the context of that too?
Isn't it a homeless man?
Yeah. Well, so like Gavin Bryars, I guess he recorded it, and while he was at his like art studio or whatever, I don't know if it was attached to like a university or whatever, but I guess while he was having the tapes, I guess they were like, because it loops obviously, so he was like setting up the tapes, and I guess he had let it play, and he's like, all right, I'll come back after this like records. And when he came back, apparently there's like a dozen students weeping all outside by the door where it was playing.
Just nuts.
It's like one of my favorites. Like, it's so good. And I'm like, I want more of that stuff, honestly. That's the stuff I'm trying to find. And that to me is like, I've got this playlist on Spotify called The Foolishness of God. And like, it's got like Wildman Fisher on there, and like Shuby Taylor, Daniel Johnston, just like outsiders performing worship. and I don't know if Wildman Fisher was saved or not, but like you know, but the song he sang is just called Jesus Loves Me. And it's just a total wacky outsider track. But just these people like sincerely singing this stuff. I mean, it just like breaks me apart. Like
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just the sincerity part. That's why I always try to figure out, I think with worship is that it's just the sound almost doesn't really even matter. It's like, as long as the heart's in the right place, you can like feel it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's bizarre that way. You know, you can have all the right elements, and it's so humbling too, as someone who every now and then gets asked to can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I just echoed. Um, you know, I get asked to lead worship every now and then, and it's just, it's such a vulnerable place, because, you know, there's just, if you don't, if you do you get out there and you set up your whole instruments, and everybody shows up, and you're like, hey, good to see you, you know, and you get ready, and then you just feel, you know, you're going through the sound check or whatever, and you feel a little bit hollow, or you feel, you know, like some days you just don't feel the depth or the intimacy or the connection. You're just like, I have no business doing this right now. You know what I mean? It's just like, I have, and people in the room could be like, no, you sound great, man. You guys sound awesome. You know, like, no, the band sounds amazing. Like the way they got the drum kit set up and mic, this is beautiful. It's like, but inside me, I'm like, no, I have no business. I have nothing. And, and I can't say I've ever like said, like gone and sat down and be like, I'm not going to, like, it brings me to this crisis of like, Spirit, if you don't move on me now, I can't move forward. And then he never doesn't answer that prayer. But I love it. I mean, it's so humbling and so scary, but there's such a desperation to it. I know where, you know, like, where I'm in that place where it's just like, I feel the presence of God, and as I worship in this place, other people will get to drink from the same well. Um, and it's just so wonderful after the fact to listen back and just, you know, I remember my wife was at we were at a service at a little church on a Tuesday night, you know, and it's kind of like this off the beaten path, like a church that meets on a Tuesday night. And she came home, she's like, that was really powerful, like that was really powerful. And I was like, wow, like tell me about it. Like I felt naked. I felt like they're naked for 50 minutes, and everybody's just like, all right, you're naked. And she's like, no, that was crazy, like God moved, like that was, and the thing was on film. Like they had filmed it, and so I went back the next day, and I watched through the whole thing, and like, no lie, the most powerful moment of me watching that was the most painful moment of me playing. I can remember back to the moment and just going like, what are we doing? Like nobody's into this. Like we've just, like, we're not singing. We're playing through these chords. Like obviously we don't know what we're doing. They know we don't know what we're doing. And then when I watched the broadcast, that was the moment that was moving me to tears, you know? And
Crazy.
it's like, you know, what's the name of your playlist?
Foolishness of God.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's that place where he's just like, you know, my strength shows up in your weakness.
Yeah, that's where I'm trying to figure out right now is how to like So God speaks to me in these interesting ways where like I'll hear something and it'll kind of pique my interest, and then I'll keep hearing it over and over again. And then I'm like, oh shoot, maybe God's trying to speak to me and I should look this up. And recently it was about incense. And like literally I just like asked my wife, I'm like, what is up with God liking incense so much? Like it's always in the Bible. Um, it was part of like the traditions and the Old Testament or whatever before you could go into the Holy and Holies and stuff. And then literally that day my sister-in-law was like, hey, I felt like I'm supposed to buy incense. And then it just kept coming up, and I was looking into it, and just to be short, it was just like like in some ways it was you burned it before outside of the Holy of the Holies, and it basically represented like they would have to beat the incense really small before they'd light it up. And I'm like, oh man, like this is like basically like what I got away from it was like I'm supposed to be like humbled, right? Like incense beaten small. And then like breathed in by God, right? Like so I'm like this offering essentially. And
So good.
I'm trying to now to like figure out how do I just and because the language I kept on hearing like while I was in worship was like, and it would like come out of me. It was like, I want to be like annihilated. I want, I wanted to become dust, like these kinds of like strong language. And I'm like, all right, God, like I'm down for that. What does that actually mean? And so now it's like, I realize like how much I'm just like not 100% in worship, even when I am doing it. And now I'm like, I'm going to pretend like there's not a single other person in the room, which is a scary place to be. Cause you could do really stupid looking stuff. Even just like when you're around your house by yourself, right? You're like talking to yourself, singing, doing whatever dumb stuff you do. And like, imagine doing that in public. And I'm like, but now I'm worshiping God. So I'm like, how do I get to the point where I don't care that there's anyone else in the room besides me and God? And that's what I'm trying to figure out. And I'm trying to figure out with worship, like how do people get in that place with worship? And the one thing that reminds me of that actually is with Neutral Milk Hotel. And he was talking, there's that lyric. He's like, I love you, Jesus Christ. And it was like King of Carrot Flowers or something is the song.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
And he just like belts that out. And from what I read, he was like, I just like locked myself up and was like, I'm going to basically just put myself in a position where I'm so vulnerable. And I just yell out the first thing that like that comes out of me. And that's like what came out of him.
Whoa.
I'm like, how do I get to that place? Where like my body actually just like comes out with something,
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's crazy because I think it's so nuts, like the visceral connection that God wants with us, and I think I probably talked with you this last time when I remember when I was on vacation with my family in 2016. That was that year was really important to me. I was on a like 9-day vacation, and every day we were over in Hawaii, and my family, we would get up at 5 a.m. and go do these crazy, like wonderful hikes, or, and the sun was out, nobody was on the trails, and it was just beautiful. And then we come back at 11, and we could get up at 5 because it felt like 8 o'clock in the morning Pacific time. We were using the jet lag in our favor, but we come back at 11, and my whole family would just crash. Like everyone was like, we're tired. We just ate lunch. We're going to an early lunch. We're going to bed. And so I would sit there every day, and I'd have like an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes, 2 hours to just sit there with God every day. And what that built up in me over 9 days of doing that was just this, like, I have to have this. I can't go back to little bite size, 15 minutes here, 20 minutes there. Like I have to have like the deep drink every day. And it's stuck with me ever since. I'm just like, it's not like a religious thing. It's just like, if I get less than an hour with God every day, I'm just not me. I just like, I feel it in my being, like, so it's crazy. And like, I've never been like this early morning person. You always hear about like, the great men and women of God who would get up at 4 a.m. and I'm like, I've never been that, but I started noticing more and more that if I want an hour with God and I want it to be protected, and I don't want, to get a client phone call like halfway through it, or my daughter needs to be picked up somewhere, then I have to do it while everyone's asleep. And so I've been getting up, while it's dark, and just like, it's the most wonderful thing to just have every single day uninterrupted, totally protected, at least an hour. And it's what you were talking about. It's like, there's not a day that goes by that I don't feel reduced to dust, that I don't feel like just reduced in the most beautiful way, like ground down, just face to face, like your thoughts are higher than my thoughts, your ways are higher than my ways. Like, what business do I have connecting with you like this? But you're interested in me, and you love me, and you want to share these things with me. And it's such a wonderful breakdown, and I feel like out of that, incense can come out. I feel like out of that, pure worship, but there's never this like, I've arrived.
Yeah.
It's never like, oh, if I keep doing this for long enough, then I will achieve, it's not that. It's the whole beauty of the process is the breakdown.
Yeah, that I'm super like excited that you said you've been doing that since 2016, because like I honestly got to this really weird place where like I felt like I'd go nuts if I didn't spend significant time. Like I had to be with him, right?
Yeah.
And like I had to be. And so and that was for like, I would say during the summer last year, I spent like up to 2 hours every day, which is crazy because I'm not like that on my own. you know?
Yeah.
And I just had to do it. And then I got a new job, and then I ran out of time in the mornings to do it. And then but now I'm at this place where I'm like, dude, I have to spend that time.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to me. But I was like, well, am I just like, maybe this is just like some sort of like moment or something? But like, you've been going for a long time. I'm like, well, oh yeah, maybe this is just like the norm, which I'm like totally excited about. I just didn't think I could even like last for longer than a year being like that. But it's like the more I go, like the deeper I have to go.
Yeah. No, it's just, it really is like that deep calls to deep. And it's amazing when, for instance, when YouTube clicked forward on that thing yesterday morning into the Helser's thing, and it said prayer for Ukraine, I was like, well, like my first thought was like, I didn't select this. This is not what I'm choosing. Like, I'm going to get gas right now. This is not what I want playing. But I let it go just because I love the Helsers. I love Johnny and Melissa. They're just beautiful people. And I was like, well, yes, we should be praying for Ukraine right now. Okay, go ahead. Pray for you. I'm listening. This is good. But I didn't go into it with this like, oh yes. And I'm telling you, within 15 to 20 seconds, there was an incense of heaven on that thing. And it just was like, just broke me down. And it's I know when that happens that person has touched that, whoever's singing, who like, someone has reached through the crowd and touched Jesus. Someone has somehow, like how Jesus in the middle of the crowd just spun around and was like, who touched me? And they're like, what are you talking about? You're getting crowded. But it's that connection, like, oh, somebody just got a hold of Jesus, like somebody just accessed heaven, and we're all getting to, like, there's this incense that fills the room, or Mary like smashing the jar open and washing Jesus' feet with it. It's just, those are the moments that just change everything. And so I've found that for that to be my normal, that I can't miss time with God, and it can't be token time, and so I would just say that, like, and we probably talked about this last time, but the idea of, I think it's Revelation 2 talks about you're doing the stuff. I love it. You're faithful. You get the job done. Like, good job. I'm stoked on you guys, but I got one problem. You, like, first love, you left it behind, and unfortunately you can't do anything for me without first love. And
Yeah, we did talk about that because I actually like put myself on mute while you were talking last. That was like when we were on the phone a couple years back, because I actually like wept because I was like really wanting to like I really felt strongly that God wanted me to do something with music, and I started, and I'm like an entrepreneur guy, so like I would like immediately just start doing stuff, and I felt like he was like, would you just like slow down? And because it became more about like, I'm trying to make this thing for God. It's like, you're just like a kid, right? I was just like, oh, I'm going to make this thing for you and it's gonna be awesome.
yeah.
And he's like, well, I want to like I want to partner with you on this. And I was running ahead. And so it became more about like me doing something. And then you mentioned that in our call, and like, yeah, I lost it actually. Cause it's like, when you, even simple things, when they become these like revelations or whatever, you're like, oh shoot, I get it. And that was like so good for me. That actually changed, my entire approach to everything. And I was like, okay, now I'm not going to do something unless, and this is really, really hard for me because I'm like such like I want to get things done guy.
Oh yeah.
I'm like, all right, I'm going to wait on you, which is so hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll look for the first step to take, and then I'll take it, and then I'll wait on you again. And like, that took like 2 years. And then now I feel like I'm finally like doing stuff I'm supposed to be doing with them.
No, it's wonderful, right? I don't know if I shared this idea with you last time, but did I talk to you about the time where David ran from Absalom, and there was a big war, and then Absalom got killed?
I don't know.
You know the story, right? Where Absalom he's riding through the forest and he gets stuck on a tree and he's hanging.
Yes.
Hanging by his beautiful hair, and then Joab has him go, like slice him up. Rebellion is over. The kingdom is established for David. It's good news, and there's there's this kid there, and he's just like the minute Joab gets the job done and Absalom's dead, Joab is stoked because the battle's won, but he also realizes he has a problem because David said, preserve the young man's life. So he's like, okay, I just saved the kingdom for my boss, but I also killed his son. So somehow we have to give the good news, bad news scenario, to King David. And so they're sitting there talking about it, and there's a young man, and he's just like, let me run. I'll go tell him. And they kind of look at him, and they're like, why would you run? You don't have good news to share with the king. And the kid comes back, and he's just like, it doesn't matter. Just let me run. And they kind of go, sure, go for it. And so then they take a little longer, and they're sitting there like talking it over. And they say, okay, they decide what to tell the king in a way that David's going to accept it. And so then they tell another messenger, they're like, okay, run with this word. So of course the first kid gets to David first because he got a head start. And he gets to David, and they're like, oh, you've come with message from the battlefield. And they're like, what's the news? And he's just like, he freezes up. He's just like, all of a sudden, he's like, I have to tell the king his son is dead. As he freezes up, it's like, some stuff happened, a lot of commotion, generally good. And they kind of, they're like, you go stand over there. Like, obviously you don't have any real news, and they look out and they're like, sure enough, this other messenger's coming. And they're like, oh, he's a good man. So surely it comes with good news. And so he gets there, and then he's allowed to speak, and he delivers the wise word. He basically says, "O king, live forever. May all your enemies be as that young man." And so he just told the king, you won the battle and you lost your son. And he said it in the wisest possible way. And of course, King David falls apart, starts mourning for his son, but the news is delivered in the best possible way. You know what I'm saying? And that right there has been the story of my life. Is I've always wanted to be I've always wanted to just be like, just let me run. Come on, I got it. Like I sense, I see what's going on. Just let me go. I gotta run. I gotta go. I got the news. I got this thing I want to like. It's got to get out of me. But I really have been humbled to be in that situation so many times where I show up in the place, people are like, here's the mic, go. And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds exactly like me. Every time I talk to you about this stuff, I always feel like I'm like, oh shoot, like this is like a word or whatever I'm supposed to be hearing. So,
but it's beautiful, it's just like the preparation of the heart is for the man, the reply of the tongue is for the Lord. And so it's so humbling and so simple. He's just like, what I want you to do, I know you feel the burden. I know you feel this thing burning in you. Like Jeremiah says, it's like fire shut up in my bones, Like I cannot hold this thing in. Elihu says the same thing. God's like, that is good. Like that is how the Holy Spirit's supposed to feel in you. That's how the word of the Lord's supposed to feel in you. But what's more important than getting that thing out quickly is the preparation in your heart. And he doesn't always tell us what the season of preparation is going to be. He's like, okay, so I want you to sign up for this 6-month course. At the end of the 6 months, then you'll be ready. He doesn't really tell us. I mean, I don't think he told Jesus like the 40 days in the desert plan. He's just like, the Spirit just is like, we're going this way. You're not like, you got 2 directions, go this way, don't eat.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. That's really good. I'm like processing this in real time here. That's good though.
Yeah. Cause then what we come back with is just this, like, Jesus comes back from those 40 days and they give him the scroll and he opens it and boom, like the eyes of every single person is fastened on him. The favor of the Lord, the presence of the Holy Spirit is just ridiculously tangible in that room. And so what can you trade for that?
Yeah.
What, like that's been my, sometimes I feel like I feel this thing, like, I know what I want to do. I want to release 3 albums in a year. That'd be the thing to do. And, and God's just like, really? You think, is that what you feel for me right now? I'm like, you tell me, but I'm so inspired when I see artists like on a tear, and I'm like, that dude just did like 2 albums last year, another great album this year, then 3 albums next year. Like, I want to be that, I want to be on a tear. And then he's just kind of humbled me, and he's just like, would you rather the volume of your output speak for you, or would you rather the tangible presence of my Holy Spirit when you open your mouth and you open your heart? Would you rather that be the hallmark of who you are? And I'm like, okay, I'll take B.
Yeah. That's something I've definitely struggled with, is like, before I was a really lazy person and I did nothing. I would just like always use this like kind of Christian excuse of like, oh, I'm just waiting for the Lord to tell me what to do next, And then I got married, and my wife like really helped kick me in the right gear. And unfortunately for her. But then I became this person who was like extremely motivated, and I'm like, all right, like I'm not going to wait on anything.
Yeah.
And so it's hard for me to like balance it out still. I think I'm learning it right now, but yeah, it's like, cause I'm like, well, surely like God doesn't want me to be this lazy bum, but I'm also like, I guess it's like finding like I guess it's like learning actually how to have like a real relationship with God. Whereas like before it was much more me just doing stuff and then hoping it was like aligned with what he wanted to do. And he would just be like, all right, I'll let you do whatever. And you can still be blessed out of the stuff you do. But now I guess it's more like, all right, God, like, yeah, I can run 100 miles an hour, but what would you rather me do right now? I guess. Is that kind of like what you've experienced or?
Yeah, I'm just like, what does it take for me to sing "The Blood of Jesus Never Failed Me Yet" for 25 minutes, looking like nothing, and end up with 10 people on their face weeping?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's beautiful. That's undeniable, and it's just, and like that's the wonderful thing about it is like God's like not after us for output. He's after us for relationship. He's after us for connection. And the beautiful thing about it is he says if you really really actually are intimately connected with me, you can't help but bear fruit. Like you can't stop output from your life when you're in that place,
Yeah.
and I feel that. And there's incredible tension in it. Like when I was finishing up hanging out with God this morning, I just felt this like, oh man, something's gotta, I need to sing a song. I need to do like that. Like I had this thing grip me of like, this needs to find a voice. Like this feeling I have right now, like it needs to find a voice, and, it, and it was just like Holy Spirit was like sitting there, like smiling, going like, it will. Like, don't sweat it. It will. You don't have to manufacture anything. Like I will find the place for you to express what you're feeling right now. And it's just great. It's just so freeing and so like I'm not worried that I'm lagging in follow through. It's like, there's no question. Like every now and then I'll start to feel that feeling, and then it'll be like God will just be like, well, look back over your last 48 hours. Like, how much Call of Duty time was in there? Like, yeah, none.
Well, so like, what do you do with that stuff? So when Holy Spirit does tell you like, hey, hold on, there's a spot for this, just hold on. Like, what do you just like mentally just like file that away and just go on until it's like prompted again, or what's your process there, or what's the situation there?
So I am listening more and more and more for I do a lot more capturing, I do a lot more capturing. I'll be in I take a lot more notes. Somebody will say something that'll rock me, and I make sure I write it down. I wake up at 3 in the morning with a little melody in my head. I go to the bathroom and like record it as a voice memo. you know. um, it's just I've just like there's like I don't regard um output or songwriting or albums. I don't look at them as a grind, even though I work really hard at it. I'm looking for I'm looking for that seed that like I couldn't manufacture. I'm like, oh, hold up, this just fell out of heaven. Like I can't just put this in the sock drawer. Like this has to go in a special place. Like this thing is a gift, and then I need to like plant this, and I need to tend it, and I need to like make. So that's kind of how I go with it. There are certain things, and that's what's so painful about that 15 song album that I told you, the Parallel Stereo record, is like every single one of those 15 were those moments. Like I have another 200 uh you know voice memos of like me playing guitar, and like a cool riff came out, like, oh, I want to play that riff, but I didn't turn that riff into a song because I didn't feel that visceral thing. I didn't feel it. It was just like, oh, it's cool. It like, my ear likes to hear that. It was more of like it scratched the itch. And I guess I've learned the difference between something scratching the itch and something like cracking my heart open.
Mm.
And I'm just like, life is short, and I want to spend all my time cultivating those things that crack my heart open.
Yeah.
And
that's really good. Is that, I think when last we spoke to you, mentioned something about there was like a window that was closing or something. Does that sound familiar?
Kind of.
It was like right around the time when you were like making worship. You said you were making worship music because you felt like there was a window closing.
Oh yeah, no, I had that. That was a scary dream. That was a scary dream. And again, it was 2016. It was what was happening that year. God was just like, hey, we need to talk. But yeah, I just had a dream that was like, again, I'd been playing a lot at church, and it was fun, and it was like, oh, this is cool. Like, I'm the old guy in the group, but everybody seems to really like my contribution. And so I just play 2-3 times a month at church. And so I had this dream, and it was just basically that in the dream we were gonna play this huge event at a big stadium in San Diego. And so we wheeled up at 5 a.m. and got all the amps, and like went up the elevator, and we're getting ready to like push them into the main stage area where we're gonna play. And I just started talking to people in the hallways, and just kind of discussing recording techniques and just things I'm into. And then all of a sudden, like, I heard the band playing, and I'm like, oh shoot, sound check starting. I'm not even set up. And then all of a sudden something just like went off in my spirit that was like, that's not sound check, that's the set. And you're not up there. And so I remember like freaking out, and I had my 2 amps and like my guitar case stacked on each other, and started pushing them through this like dark hallway to get to the stage. And it was just like, hold up, what's worse right now, for me to just miss the set altogether, or to like awkwardly go up mid set, mid first song, and like, oh, don't mind me, I'm just setting up my amp. and I was just like, then I woke up from the dream. Like, I didn't even get to figure out what my answer was. And I was just like, it was very clear God was just, it was like, the ship's moving away from the dock, and you might not be on it. And I just prayed. Nobody was, I don't know, I think my family was like up at Kathleen's parents, and I had to stay behind for some reason. But I just was there in the house that morning, and I just remember praying for like an hour and a half, like, oh God, please don't let that dream mean that like I missed it, that I missed my calling. Like, please, Lord, please, just like, and it was just one of those things where I like didn't hear a lot back. And I just
go.
No,
I was gonna say, so we're I mean, how did you feel like spiritually back then? Like, were you in a good place, or was it just okay?
I was, but like I had this sort of, I would say the 2012 to 2016 were some weird years for me, because it was like I had gone from, I would say like 2007, 2006, 2007, I was doing a ton of worship leading and writing worship songs all the time, and just like, and then doing soul junk stuff. And then, the 2009, 2010, 2011, there was just less call for me being the guy leading or writing. It was just like, I was just like, they were good with me like playing guitar, and it was just this, okay, that's fine, sure, that's cool. And I just kind of focused a little more on soul junk. But I went out of that into starting Octagrave, and I was the only believer in that band, and I wrote most of the songs, so it was just like, to me, it was not an issue. And we were just like, and we immediately just started getting asked to do tours all over the place. Like Sebadoh had us open like 3 tours for them, and Pinback had us open a tour, and we were the kind of band that just played 2-3 times a week just on our own. So, you know, we could usually grab an audience pretty quick because it was just the sets would catch fire, you know. And so we had been like, you know, I had 2 kids, so I didn't want to live on the road, but I'd go out for like 10, 11, 12 days, 13 days, you know, and then come back home. And so that was 2012 to 2016. And it was fun. And it was like, you know, Octagrape put out a lot of music, recorded quite a bit, rehearsed a ton. But then it was like 2015, 2016, I kind of started like getting asked at this new church I was going to. They started asking me to play rhythm guitar. And so I was just like, sure. Yeah, I'm down. I'll help, you know? And, I think God was just like, I think it was kind of this thing of, hey, where did you go? You know, and it was less about like, it's less about like the externals of like, why are you in this band and why are you on tour? But it was just like, it was this simple thing of like, hey, you used to write songs for me. You used to sing your heart out for me. And, it was difficult, man. I was just like, yeah, I did, you know? And it was just a simple thing of the Holy Spirit being like, why don't you do that anymore? And I remember just thinking like, wow, I guess I'm really embarrassed to say because I don't have a platform to do that from anymore. And it was kind of like, it was like, well, am I not just worth it? Just me? And man, just cut me up. I just started going into my studio at 6:30 in the morning when nobody was here, and I would just sing to God every morning. You know, I just sing to him. And sometimes it was my own songs, sometimes it was other people's songs. 6 in the morning, you know, it's like sometimes I didn't feel like I had much, but I started to understand like he just loved that.
Yeah. Wow. And so, and then you had that dream around that time, and
Yeah.
And I guess you felt like that dream was averted.
Yeah, I mean, he just at the end of an hour and a half of like me going like, I'll move anywhere, I'll do anything, I'll quit my job, I don't care, you know, God, I just need to, I'm a worshiper, I need to be, you know, what you're calling me to be. I don't want you to tell me I missed the bus, you know, please. And at the end of that, all he gave me was this one verse from Proverbs where it just said, you know, he who tends the tree will eat of its fruit. And you know, he who serves his master will himself be honored. And it didn't make any real sense to me at that time, but I was just like, I have a tree to tend, you know, I have a tree to tend. And I just knew, okay, when I'm given the opportunity to worship in any context, like whether it's just meeting God in the morning, or whether it's like showing up at church 6:45 on a Sunday and playing rhythm guitar with my guitar not even in the monitors, you know. It's like it didn't matter. It was just like, okay, this is a chance for me to tend this tree, you know. It doesn't have to be glamorous, you know. It's just like God's just give me a simple job, and dig in the dirt, tend the roots, water it, you know, and fertilize whatever, you know. And it's just been awesome to walk that out and just be like, it's cool to have a simple job, and to like know that all my heart's in this simple job he's given me. And yeah,
that's really good. Yeah. I think for me, like previously until the last couple of years, I was always really driven by just like certain accomplishments or whatever that I wanted to do that felt meaningful. And then this last several months, it was interesting because, Stuart Brand, the guy who did like the world catalog in the 60s and like, I don't know if it matters, but he had this whole thing on like, on maintenance, and he basically talks about maintenance in this like really artful way. And I was like, I remember one day I was just by myself at the house and I was like, I'm gonna clean my house, and this like, and I'm going, this sounds really stupid, but like, I was like, I'm gonna clean my house with like very intentful purpose, and I'm gonna do it for God, and no one's there, and like, but it felt like when so I cleaned my house, and I felt as if it honestly felt like an art performance, which sounds so silly to say out loud, but like, and then it got me into this place of like where I was like, and this is just at least for me personally, where I'm like, man, God's speaking to me about obedience is like this like really high level performance art, and like where it doesn't matter what the performance is per se, it's like the obedience itself is like the act unto God.
yeah,
And like I'm like, well, I want to do it like excellently, right? And whether that's me sitting on a rock talking to God by myself for 2 hours or anything, and that's like the performance. And I'm like, I want it to be a situation where God can ask me to do anything, whether it's simple and quiet or it's something ridiculous and public,
yeah,
and be obedient to it. And that's like my role, um instead of striving to have some sort of artistic practice that people care about. Like I no longer care about like, or I say this and I hopefully my heart matches this, but like I no longer care, or I'm beginning to no longer care about like what anyone else thinks, other than did I get the job done for God.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's so crazy. It's so like reductive in a way, it's so humbling, because like, here you had this thing where John 12, where there's this, it's right after the like Lazarus is raised from the dead, and
Mm-hmm.
you just have this like cultural like moment where there's so much momentum behind Jesus. It's just, he's just like, all of a sudden Greeks are showing up going like, we want to see this guy, we heard about this guy. you know they found his disciples and were like, go bring us to him, we have to meet him. And he just, it's nuts in John 12 where his focus is versus where everyone else's focus is. And he's just like, the chapter ends with him saying like, you know I judge, all judgments committed to me, but I judge no one. And it's really this simple. I just have a word that I am responsible to speak, that my Father has given me, and I will not speak anything besides that. And I will deliver that word powerfully and purely and faithfully, but I will say nothing beyond that word, and I won't hold one word back. And every one of those words will rise up and judge man at the end of time. And it's just so crazy to see that simplicity of he's just like, I'm not here to emote. I'm not here to give you this magical self-expression. Um, with all my heart and soul, I just have been given a word that I will deliver. And and then earlier in the chapter he says, unless a seed dies and goes into the ground, it's good for nothing. And so it's like his willingness to be reduced, and to take this incredibly simple thing and say, I will only be this, and I will be it with every fiber of my being.
Yeah. That's that's it, man. I think that is. It's just so simple. I mean, like you're talking about that stuff, and I'm like, shoot, yeah. It's like I just need to die. Like what was the moment that made me come to this situation anyway, right? I like died to myself for a moment, and that's when my life changed, and I gave it over to God instead of me running it myself. And I'm like, that must have been a very profound moment, even if I realized it or not. So I'm like, how do I like live in that moment? And I hadn't, honestly, for a long time. You go in and out of stuff, and I'm like, oh, how do I just live in like that situation? I think is where I'm at right now.
Yeah. No, it's so easy. It's so easy with the way that it's like, let's face it, in our culture right now, it's just like you pitch everything as like, hey, this is you. This is you on steroids. Like, your life will be so much better if you add this thing, and that's the best you can hope for at any point, is for people to add your little thing to their queue.
Yeah.
And so obviously it's just like, well, Christians have figured that out too, and you're just like, well, you've got a pretty great life, and you're just like, you're going ahead and you're doing good things, and like, if you just add Jesus, it's like an extra gear, like, who doesn't want extra gear, and but that's not who Jesus is. It's never what he's like. He never pitched himself as the extra gear, like the way to plush you out. It's like, you're right. He's just like, he's like, this is how it works. We die. So that resurrection life can spring to life in us, and then, we don't go back. It's not like we go back and reclaim.
Oh, hey, are you still there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
But I know it's all of us. It's every single one of us, and I think that's why I go back to, that finding the secret place, finding the secret place, and not allowing ourselves to be torn for the world. Like, I'll trade anything to keep my secret place, and it's just a non-negotiable. It's that place where we die daily, where like, I mean, come on. It's just like, if Jesus hit that point at the apex of his ministry, where he had to like sweat blood and say, like, I don't want what I want what you want. Like, when are we ever going to mature beyond that? We're just not. There will always be that tension. If Jesus had that choice of like, my will or your will, after everything I've done, I still have to answer that question. After everything I've said, every one of the words you gave me to say, I did every one of the works that you gave me to do, and I still am faced with a very real choice. Do I want what I want, or do I want what you want? And so there's no shame in saying that we have that tension. And it's just a daily thing. It's just like, that's why Jesus would say, you take up your cross daily.
Yeah. That's I think that's probably a pretty good spot to end on, actually. Like, that's like a good point to end on. And also because I kept you like 40 minutes past what I told you earlier.
Oh, good.
But
it only took me minutes to figure out the technology, so.
Well, I'm glad we figured it out, man. This is actually super good for me too. Like, this actually like I can't think of anything else other than like spiritual jargon, but like it like really fed my soul.
Good.
And when I edit this, I think I'll probably have to add like "Secret" by Parallel Stereo, because actually that's like my favorite track on that album.
Yeah.
My favorite worship album is honestly I love is the one you did in 2011.
Oh yeah.
What was that called? Thank You.
Thank You. Yeah.
Yeah. Daniel Smith told me about that, and he was like, "This is probably one of my favorite worship albums," and it's like seriously good. But like that song "Secret" is like, that's like one I like throw in to like get ready, to like spend some serious time with God.
Oh, that's good. I'm flattered. No, it's my favorite song on the album too. I mean, I say that now. Choose between your children, kind of thing.
Well, anything else, man, before we go? Anything we didn't cover?
No, I love it. I mean, Tyler, thank you. You just like you have a gift. You have a way of just drawing out, just putting, I mean, I speak for myself. You put me at ease, and then you just draw out, just stuff I don't even know I have going on. Like, so thank you. Like, keep doing what you're doing. This is wonderful.
Hey, thank you so much, man.
You're in that secret place. Hear the sound